Hello, my name's Justin Decluder. I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. And today, we're talking about Věra Chytilová, or Chytilova. I have a lot of difficulty pronouncing her name.
Yes, this often is a problem that we run into when we talk about Eastern European filmmakers, Asian filmmakers, filmmakers from all over the world, really.
North American filmmakers, whose names I'm not familiar with.
We try, and we cover the waterfront on this podcast, from Kowloon to California. And today, we find ourselves in Soviet Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic.
Yes, we're talking about the director of DAISIES, one of the big movies when people get into experimental cinema. Had you seen this one before, Will?
I had not. It had always been on my list, because this is not just a landmark of Soviet cinema, even though it was suppressed in the Soviet Union. And it's not just a landmark of experimental cinema, it's also a landmark of feminist cinema. It's a movie that's come up a lot in recent years as there's been an increasing appetite for female filmmakers and female stories.
And we'll get it right out of the way right here, is that this is a film that I struggled with mightily. And I had seen it before. I had seen it in a theatrical setting. And when I saw it, I went, maybe there's just something I'm not getting. So I was very excited to revisit it for this podcast, now with my galaxy brain, and I had the same reaction again. Like, I know why it's important, I know why it's radical, I know why people like it, but it feels like I should be having fun with this.
Yes, I had exactly the same feeling. However, I do say that with respect.
Of course.
And I want to reassure people listening that I think both Justin and I found a lot to appreciate in this filmmaker's work this week.
I think that the films that she made after Daisy's kind of shut down her career were much more interesting, and her style went in a specific direction that Daisy's hints at, but it's a different kind of take on disturbing or kind of shocking an audience.
Well, I am by no means an expert in Věra Chytilová.
Neither of us are.
Again, pardon if I mispronounced her name. I know she's made many movies. I've seen 3 of them. But what strikes me about the 3 movies is how different they are from each other stylistically. They are all to some degree about living in a corrupt system, living in an insane world. One of them, Daisies, is a madcap Dadaist provocation. Another film that I watched called Panel Story, or Birth of a Community, it's this Altman-esque sprawling tapestry, but with a very strange visual style, almost like Possession or a movie like that. And then the third movie I watched is a rigorous, small-scale feminist character study, which feels more in line with the work of somebody like Chantal Akerman. I think what unites the films is, the same kind of anger, some of the same thematic concerns, but all 3 of them seem like different strategies for coping with living in an insane and horrible world. And that's very interesting and makes me interested to explore more of what she has to offer.
Going through the films that I watched for this podcast this week, what I found really interesting is that kind of aggressive style is the one that she would adopt a lot in the films that I watched following Daisies, like The Apple Game, which is kind of a more straight ahead, almost romantic comedy thing, the aforementioned Panel Stories, and I also checked out a kind of slasher film sort of horror picture called Wolf's Hole, and they all have that like in-your-face, handheld, wide-angle, moving the camera all about and creating a sense of unease with just composition and editing when you wouldn't expect an edit. But if you go back all the way to something different, her first feature film, it is much more controlled, and there is that rawness because the film is split in 2 directions, one more fictional and one more real in the sense of like capturing a moment. But you can sense right there, like Will said, that there's a provocation towards the audience, that there is a kind of like goosing almost of the situations that are being presented on screen. What's the plot of Something Different, Will?
Yeah, I loved this movie. And by the way, you can watch it on the Criterion channel right now, along with a lot of her other films. It has 2 strands, one of which is presented as documentary, one of which is presented as fiction. The documentary part follows this Olympic gymnast named Eva Bosakova, pardon if I'm mispronouncing that again. She is nearing her retirement, but she's training for one more Olympics, and we follow her through her rigorous training regimen, very painful looking training regimen, where she's working with a coach who, is working her very hard. And
calling her a coward, slapping her in the face.
And this is put in counterpoint to the life of a housewife who lives in a marriage that I think it's fair to say has lost its spark. She has a husband and a son. The husband spends all day at work, comes home tired from work, wants to read the newspaper. At one point, they're having a fight over the fact that he reads the newspaper the minute he gets home. And he says, well, where do I have the time to read the newspaper? I'm working all day. And then she says words to the effect of, well, my job never stops. I work from morning to night. I think they both kind of have a point. Everyone in this movie is living in a prison, even if they're not literally living in a prison. These are people who I guess at some point chose this life, or maybe this life chose them, and now they can't get out of it.
In the movie, the housewife tries to escape, start an affair with another man, but it's just a different form of misery that she runs into. It's like she's trading the life that she has, the life that she knows, the life that she's comfortable with, for, as the title says, something different, but it's just bad in a different way.
And you look at this Olympic athlete and what else is she going to do? She's been training her whole life to get to this point, and now she's at this point, and
she will perform, and then as the film shows, she will become a teacher. That is the cycle, the only cycle that she can go through.
It makes you realize that, you think you're living a free life, you think you have autonomy over your life, but early on you make decisions, and those decisions have these consequences that you never expected, and then if you want to get out of that life, yeah, you can be like the housewife who just ends up transferring to another terrible life. It's an incredibly bleak film.
Is the film, is there joy in what the gymnast is doing? Because while the training is miserable, you see a real performance at the end, and she seems to be smiling. She seems to have had a fun time, even though that there's a shot of her and her competitors all lined up, and I was like, I can't tell them apart. They all look the same.
I also think there may even, correct me if I'm totally wrong about this, but I think there may be even a little bit of ambiguity in how the housewife story ends, because, the husband says that he's going to divorce her. He says he's had enough, and she kind of throws herself at him, and she's begging him to stay. And it's a terrifying thing to, first of all, give up on a relationship that you've devoted your whole life to and then go do something different, as the title says. And also just to imagine what that would be like,
And like a lot of people in life, the ending seems to indicate that she somehow patched things up and she's back in the miserable existence that she was in at the beginning of the movie, because this is the thing that she knows best, and her attempts to find something different failed, so why even try? Which is a bummer of a ending.
And the filmmaking is very masterful. These two stories are contrasted to each other in many different ways, little details, and the movie feels very lived in, especially the part with the housewife.
It's very controlled, and even though it's taking place in just an apartment building, every shot is perfectly chosen. This is an early filmmaker trying to make her mark in a very careful, formalist style.
I think we should maybe talk about Daisies, because in terms of tone, in terms of style, it couldn't be more different than something different. As I said earlier, a lot of the anger is the same. I'll just describe what plot there is in this film. We open, first of all, with stock footage of the U.S. Navy in the Second World War. And then we move on to the main plot. You've got two girls. I think they're older teenagers. There's Marie 1 and Marie 2. They are very wacky.
Oh, they love to make faces and, be shit disturbers. It is essentially a montage of episodic sequences of them blue-balling some older businessmen and creating chaos over a colorful, quick-cut, very tableau-esque world.
Yeah, in the opening scene, they're acting like robots. They're moving mechanically, they're speaking mechanically.
And the soundtrack is mimicking that with Like, they are dolls. That is a representation. That's how the world takes them to be.
And then they decide to be bad. So they go on all of these dates, as you said, with older men.
Well, first they have to take a apple from the tree of knowledge and take a bite.
That's right. Which, I mean, these two characters, I guess you could call them anti-heroes in a way, but I mean, I kind of like the way that the movie retcons the idea of the tree of knowledge and sort of like puts a feminist spin on the Bible tale to make the tree of knowledge like good.
Yeah, it's a thing that lets them be free. They don't get punished for this. They get to break out of their doll-like existence and make wacky faces and create chaos in restaurants.
Yeah, so, you know, there are all those dates with the older men and they wreak havoc on those and they just kind of like discard all the men who are all very confused. They go to a nightclub and they wreak havoc there.
It's like the Marx Brothers, right?
It is kind of like there's that I mean, there's the part with an older woman who, like, is very jealous of their youth and freedom. And what do they do to the older woman? They rob her.
As they should.
There's so many scenes of them, like, destroying food, which is symbolic of men or the patriarchy.
Which is supposedly what the Czechoslovakian government used as an excuse to ban the film, that there was food being destroyed on screen, and that was an obscene sight to show audiences.
Yeah, I mean, I was just reading up on the movie, I was amused that one of the MPs said that it was withdrawn from cinemas because it was depicting the wanton.
I don't know if I could describe wanton, but I know what wanton is when I see it, and it's daisies.
I feel a bit weird saying that this movie left me like just a little bit cold when like...
Well, I could describe it very easily. If I was trapped at a party with these people, I'd be like, oh my gosh.
Last week we were talking about Ratfinka Boo Boo and talking about how much we love that, and I mean, that movie has a similar spirit to this one, although it's definitely less technically accomplished. The way that she goes from like color to black and white and tinted footage and the really jagged editing rhythms.
Yeah, it's difficult for me to kind of, I don't know, extrapolate what left me cold, but I never was like laughing along with these characters, and I'm not quite sure why. Was there stuff not wacky enough? It's weird because I watched 3 films that Vera made after this, and they have slapstick stuff, and it's all over the place. That works really well. And for me, it didn't work in Daisies. And for people who haven't seen Daisies, we are in the minority here.
Well, I mean, my thumb is still up on this. I mean, there's still plenty to admire. And do you think if it leaves us a little cold, there's a gendered element to this? Because these girls in this film, they're Groucho. They're Tom Green and Freddy Got Fingered.
Give me like some slapstick, or give me some more destructive stuff than what they do in the movie.
There's something kind of whimsical about it, isn't there? Like it's not exactly a violent movie. It's violent to food.
Oh, I love the final set piece when they're just having a big old food fight, doing what Dr. Strangelove didn't have the balls to do.
You watched a documentary about the filmmaker this week. Notice that I keep saying the filmmaker because I don't want to keep mispronouncing her name.
Because you don't want to say her name.
You watched a documentary. What can you tell us about her upbringing and what led her to film and some of the considerable obstacles that she faced making films in the Soviet Union?
Oh my God. Like looking at her life and what she was able to do, there were so many obstacles. Like she says it herself, when she got into film school, she was like the oldest one in her class, the only woman in her class, that when she married her husband, who was a cinematographer, like they got a 16mm camera. She was so excited to film. He wouldn't let her touch it because he said that she would break it. And that he still went on to shoot all of her early feature films, that after Daisies, they would kind of part ways as creative collaborators. And that's when I actually like her style more, when she's kind of on her own. And like Daisies being banned, she being banned from making movies. And it was only when the government was looking for some female representation as directors that they went back to her. And like Czechoslovakia didn't even have a print of Daisies. They had to go, I believe, to Paris to get one, because that was the only uncut version that still existed that they could get, and so they could make copies of to show, look, oh, Czechoslovakia, there's women filmmakers here as well. And that the next film after Daisies, like the first big theatrical film, The Apple Game, it was a huge financial success, which kind of pissed off, bureaucrats, but they had to keep letting her make films because she had that success under her belt. I mean, when you watch that documentary, it's only an hour long. It's mostly just her walking around her house, talking about how she just loves filming everything. She's interested in everything, but she's also kind of like thorny and kind of angry in a way that you don't always see from, elder statesmen, women filmmakers. I think of, again, the adorkable grandma that Agnes Varda was, or the way that people portrayed her as near the end of her life. And there's none of that. They're just kind of, I just want to be out there and making movies because this is my passion and they won't let me. I haven't won an international prize in so long.
You watched The Apple Game. What did you think of it?
I thought it was great. I thought that the style, the slapstickness of it, the playing on a genre, the fact that it's a romantic comedy about this dweeb doctor who's a Lothario. He works at a maternity ward and a new nurse arrives and he kind of has a thing for her. They fall in love. And like I was saying, there's like slapstick. There is, if you want to see some babies being born, you will see it in The Apple Game. And there's that rawness that kind of defined, I think, her filmography, later in her career. It doesn't have that kind of daisies-ness or even something different, formalism. It's kind of like in your face, you're in the moment, weird cuts, weird angles, wide angles. And I think that kind of cohesiveness to it really worked for me in The Apple Game, which continued on in the film that I know we both watch.
Prefab Stories or Panel Story. I mean, Prefab Story is probably the better title because, that's what the housing units were called, prefabricated high-rises.
They were also known as panel units. So, they both work. I think maybe North American audiences, prefab, we have the idea of what it is instantly, but I believe panel appears on screen.
You can find it under Prefab Story on the Criterion Channel. This is a really overwhelming movie, I thought. It's this...
Oh, man, it's less than 90 minutes, but there is seemingly 100 characters running around.
Yeah, it's set at this big high-rise park, basically, with all of these gigantic concrete buildings, socialist architecture where it's supposed to be very democratic. Every unit is the same. Every building is kind of the same.
Even though that it's falling apart, even though it's in the middle of being built, and that people are all fighting for units.
Yeah, that's the visual paradox that's developed. I mean, it seems perpetually under construction, even though every unit seems to also be 100 years old. We meet all of these characters, there's a pregnant young woman, there's an out-of-work actor, there are old people, young people. We see a dizzying number of incidents take place.
And it is, I have to say, so perfectly structured, the visual cues or even thematic ones that lead from scene to scene, whether it be a woman screaming that cuts to fire burning or somebody mentioning, a baby in dialogue, and then it cuts to someone actually with a baby. These connections are all very intricate in the way that it's constructed, which is surprising considering that the camera is moving as if it's barely capturing the action as it's happening on screen.
Yeah, it's a difficult viewing experience, not just because the visual and editing style is so frantic, but also just because of what we're looking at. This muddy and ugly and gray just area where everything looks cold and miserable. But it's a very rewarding viewing experience because it's very funny and very dense.
Oh yeah, I thought it was very funny. That slapstick I talked about in The Apple Game is in play again in this picture. That kind of chaos, but it's just controlled enough that you can get invested in what's going on. And I never got lost in all of the characters, which I was very surprised by, considering that the first shot, all the names scroll on screen. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to keep track of all of this. And the soundscape of this film is as punishing as if you were standing in that apartment building where construction is going. Because endless construction, endless musical cues that is defining the action, this big dramatic thing that is happening. And while there is a kind of nihilistic view at the misery of life, there's also some humanism to be found here or there, even if sometimes it is forced upon these characters by one individual who is pushing things forward.
The prefabricated buildings are used as this visual metaphor, I guess, for the Soviet person, the Soviet subject, where everyone is basically the same. And in fact, as the movie goes along, you see all of these characters who don't know who anyone is. And
yeah, or, I don't need to get involved in that. It has nothing to do with me.
It becomes the opposite of the collective solidarity that socialism is supposed to inspire. And I was struck watching it. Maybe this is a banal insight, I don't know, but it feels like the communism depicted in this film, and in fact all of her films, is not unlike the capitalism that we live under. I mean, you look at a movie like Something Different, and the relationship that the housewife has to her husband, this transactional relationship that she can't really leave because there's no support system for her, there's no way for her to get out of it, is not unlike what millions of women suffer under capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's all about systematic rot that, you know, on the outside, the idea of these prefabricated buildings, it's great on paper, but the people in charge of it are corrupt, and that trickles down to the people that need to participate in these systems. Vera is not shy about just letting the audience know when, you know, a young mother needs to get her kid in a nursery, and they're like, sorry, we're all filled up, we can't help you. And she's like, all right, I'll give you a payment. You know, if this is what I need to do, my friend did it. This is the only way to work within this corrupt system. Or someone that tells, repairmen, I'm in this apartment. I cannot get any other apartment. You are not throwing me out. And then the repairmen speaking to themselves going, maybe this is what we should do. Give the apartment to people that don't have homes. Then we won't have to do repairs because they'll be so happy to have it.
Daisies is the only one of her films that I feel like has really entered the canon, although that may change soon given the increased availability of her work. The fact that a lot of her major films are on the Criterion Channel now, for instance. And most of these movies were not widely seen, even in the Soviet Union during her lifetime, or during most of her lifetime, certainly not widely seen in the West. And it's interesting to kind of uncover them because they feel like, her films feel like these strange fusions of a lot of different trends that hit international art house filmmaking over the last 50 or 60 years. Like, there's a bit of the French New Wave, there's a bit of neorealism, there's a bit of structuralist filmmaking. I don't know, I even see some like kind of Terry Gilliam energy in some of her stuff.
Oh, absolutely. It is, especially with those wide angles. That's that Terry Gilliam kind of perspective on things. You know, I'd be fascinated to know why, you know, her films didn't get the distribution that others have. I mean, it probably has something to do with, you know, her government either not giving a push behind them, her being a woman filmmaker, so people were just kind of like brushing her aside, because it feels like something like Prefab that could have easily penetrated an international market, considering that it is Altman-esque, it's in your face, it speaks to a kind of universal idea of experiencing these kind of things. And yeah, I don't know. I'm happy that it's out there, and she did have her career. So it wasn't like she made 3 films and then she just disappeared. She just had to fight for it every single minute of the day. And she didn't get the attention I think that she deserved. Like The Apple Game, which I mentioned, it only exists on like a DVD that came out in some Asian country. I couldn't find exactly which one, unsubtitled. So, you know, there's still a lot to be discovered out there beyond Daisies, I feel. And a lot of it is extremely interesting. Like I mentioned, The Wolf's Hole, which I watch, like that is essentially a genre film. There's aliens in the movie. And it is just super weird and in your face. And while it doesn't really deliver those kind of genre thrills, like there's not really any murders or anything in it, it is so odd. And it's hitting those Zalowski kind of paranoid, in-your-face beats that I think that there's a whole audience out there that could discover that. And it's sitting right there on the Criterion Channel for you to watch.
Well, Justin, do we have any letters this week?
No, Will, this is all we have to talk about this subject. I did all this research on the Czechoslovakia communist revolution, you know, the Velvet Revolution, the Velvet Divorce, the split from Czechoslovakia into the Czech Republic and Slovakia. I mean, you did all that research too as well, right, Will?
Yes, I did. I gotta go. And then you hear tires screeching. Do we have any letters, Justin?
Oh, of course we have letters. As per usual, you can send us letters at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. And our first letter is from Alex Yu, and it goes, "Hey, Justin and Will, thanks so much for making this podcast. I recently discovered it, so forgive me if you have already covered this topic in a main episode or a Patreon one. Anyway, one of the things I like to do while listening to your podcast is work on Warhammer 40K models. I hope it's 40K and not like 40,000.
I was hoping you were going to say have sex.
Oh, God. Please do not let us know if you do that. We just assume everybody does." And the letter continues, "If you're not so familiar, it's a tabletop kind of Dungeons & Dragons. Anyway, last year a lone motion graphics artist made a 13-minute fan film that took the Warhammer scene by storm. It's one of the most impressive fan films I've seen, which got me thinking. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on fan films. What makes the short film, which is called Astartat, oh man, more stuff I can't pronounce, so interesting is that Game Workshop, the company that makes Warhammer, hired the creator and bought his fan film, making it official. Love the podcast. Thank you for keeping me company during the lockdown. Thanks, Alex. Fan films. Not a fan, I have to say.
Really? I mean, I'm actually quite intrigued by the idea of doing an episode on fan films because
I think we've discussed it in the past because our great love for Batman Dead End came up.
Oh, that's right. We have, in fact, discussed Batman Dead End on, I think, a Patreon episode, which was not about fan films. It was about, like, viral early internet or like pre-internet kind of underground videos that used to circulate, because we talked about that and we talked about You're a Rat Bastard, Charlie Brown, and like Bambi versus Godzilla, stuff like that.
My God, I don't even remember that discussion.
You don't remember that? Well, Batman Dead End, just the thought of it tickles me, because in like the early 2000s, the late 90s, there was this buzz in certain internet circles that this Batman fan film was the best Batman movie. It's like, forget the Tim Burton, forget the Joel Schumacher. This is the thing that does Batman right and actually captures the spirit of the comic. And in fact, I think no less than Mr. Kevin Smith himself was quoted as saying that.
And what is the Batman fan film? Well, it's a guy in a, I guess pretty good Batman costume, walks down an alleyway, punches the Joker, and then boom, he gets attacked by the Predator.
That's right. And I mean, the short does have some atmosphere. It has some nice kind of like rainy vibes, and the Batman costume is not bad, but I mean, you can't get around the fact that it's really stupid.
I think that my issue with fan films, I view it sometimes as the filmmakers just want to bring to life a vision of the property that they love, and they don't often think about like, okay, but how do I make this engaging? How do I find an interesting angle, a reason to do this beyond, look, I made a cool cosplay, now it's on screen and it's moving, and I guess maybe it's kind of doing cool stuff? Because in my personal opinion, there's just a limit to like, okay, you did that, but what else did you do? How could you have made something more compelling without just kind of illustrating or bringing a comic book to life? And that's just my opinion. Like, cosplaying is huge. I like cosplaying, so why do I not like fan films? I am a mass of contradictions, if you will.
Well, also, fan films are like amateur productions. They don't have the resources behind them. Even the worst.
That's fine.
Yeah, and that is fine, but it's like, it's a reason sometimes why the idea isn't more than just, what if I made a Batman movie? Because a Hollywood movie has layers of bureaucracy that are there to say, okay, why would you make a Batman movie? What's the angle on this Batman movie?
And like, why does the alien have to show up and like grab Batman?
Or the Predator or whoever it is, yeah. But I would actually be curious to know, like, what are the canonical fan films beside the one that the letter writer mentioned, and besides Batman Dead End? Like, are there some really good ones?
Yeah, ones that just like take a property and find a compelling way to show it on screen beyond just like, hey, Lobo's on screen and he's killing Santa, which I remember was another big one around like the comic book fan community when I was looking at that stuff and reading my Wizard magazine. I would also say that when you mentioned that there's an amateurish to it, I think that the fan film thing that bugs me is when it's really slick and expensive looking and you can tell they spent a lot of money on it. And I'm like, why? Do your own thing instead. I know why, because they get attention, because people are like, look, the Punisher is doing stuff that the Punisher has never done on screen. Our next letter is from Hunter Sawyer, and he goes, hello, important cinema clubberinos. I've always appreciated the clarity and sharpness of your conversations, but recent episodes, for no reason than my own neurosis, have turned my attention to a perennial problem I've had when watching films. Despite taking numerous film classes as an undergrad, and eventually getting a master's in film studies, yes, I'm currently unemployed, I've always run into a master elemental problem when writing and talking about film. I've always had a struggle when attempting to take notes during a film, and the various strategies of doing so, pausing to jot down a thought, attempting to write without looking at the page, watching a film twice and focusing on note-taking the second time around, have always seemed inadequate and disruptive to the process of actually experiencing a film. Do y'all film potters have any tips, tricks, or cool stunts to share with a congenital note failure such as myself? Thank you for your time and keep doing the Lord Andrew Sarris's good work, Hunter.
I don't overthink it, I gotta say. There are some movies that I take notes on, some movies that I don't take notes on. It helps that on this podcast we're often talking about movies that we've seen at least once before, so that the sacredness of watching it isn't all that important. But I would say that notes that I've taken for this podcast haven't been all that detailed.
Yeah, usually when I take notes, it's just names and dates and stuff like that. Or maybe like one big thought that I can kind of jot down while I'm watching something. But I don't really get too in the weeds for the Important Cinema Club. And I've only done it for something like No Such Thing as a Bad Movie podcast, because we go through the plot beat by beat. So I need to write notes down, because my instinct when I do a podcast about films is to just kind of like gloss over stuff, because I assume the people listening have maybe not seen the film, or it's not something they're familiar with. So if I go like beat by beat over something, it can get like, okay, come on, move on. I need a point of contact here.
Yeah, I do more notes on Michael and us too for the same reason. And for this, I think, I don't know about you, sometimes I'll write notes like before we record, after watching the movies, just to have like a framework.
Just to have like a point that you can hit while you're talking, or like, all right, I can bring it over here from this quote by this person, or this historical or trivia fact.
A little peek behind the curtain, folks. That's how the sausage is made.
I mean, people may be surprised that I can't remember people's names or dates. I know, shocking. Our last question is from Tony Marshall, and he goes, "Hey guys, me and my friends have been binge watching British movies to get away from the American oversaturation in our film school. Note, we are all British." That's funny that in their British school that they are being forced to watch only American films.
Well, I mean, what can you say? America has a better film history.
You know what, Will? I've talked about this with you over the last few months, but we got to do like more British filmmakers. We barely touch them.
You know what I would like to do? An area of film that I have not really explored at all are those like...
Wait, because I have... let me continue this letter. And a debate cropped up about what would be more painful: marathoning all the James Bonds or all of the Carry On movies. I don't know how famous the Carry On films are in Canada, but I imagine it is a question challenge I put to you guys. I know you hate James Bond and love dated comedy, so it felt appropriate to put to you. I mean, you don't hate James Bond. I don't really hate James Bond either.
No, I don't hate James Bond, but whenever it comes up, whenever James Bond comes up, we're always talking about how they're kind of boring and, you know...
Which they are.
And yeah, they're usually disappointing, but I mean, I wouldn't keep watching them if I hated them.
That's right. I mean, sometimes I see your journey on Letterboxd and you're like, yeah, Roger Moore, karate chops some guy in this 2.5-hour movie.
Even the bad James Bond movies have stuff that keeps me coming back. It's like, oh yeah, you know, some nice scenic vistas. And...
Maybe Roger Moore will die in this one because he looks to be on the brink of it.
The Timothy Dalton one, the License to Kill, that one was pretty good when I watched it not that long ago.
Oh, that one's fun. Yeah, the dark one. Have you watched On Her Majesty's Secret Service yet?
Oh yeah, it's really good. That's like one of the top 3, I would say.
And as far as Carry On movies, I have never seen one of them.
No, but I mean, I am definitely aware of them. When I was a kid, they had some of them at my video store.
Yeah, they looked a little too naughty.
I've not seen a second of any Carry On film, but I get the gist. It's like Benny Hill kind of comedy, like women and their knickers, and some fucking guy is horny.
But lots of spoofing. Like, they were the spoof movies of their day, because there's like Carry On Screaming, Carry On Sergeant, like... You know, it's about tackling genres and having women with, large breasts that are participating in these types of things, from my North American perspective.
Yeah, I think there was always kind of the perception here, at least, that, like, you had your Monty Python and your Fawlty Towers, and that was serious. That was good British comedy. And then there was the stuff for the plebs, like...
For some reason, I saw a lot of Benny Hill when I was a kid. Like, I don't know, was it like a PBS staple? They're like, throw some Benny Hill on, so we don't need to think about it.
I definitely saw some Benny Hill. I remember I saw there was a special he did called Benny Hill in New York, and the reason I remember it is because it opens with him doing a rap.
Wow. Like, so this must be like, in his years, Benny Hill.
Oh yeah, he's like very close to death in this, and yeah,
what could he possibly do other than like look at women on stage and be like, oh, because wasn't that a shtick?
That's basically what he did. Like, he came out and he did this rap, and like he was surrounded by like dancers who were dressed in kind of like New York style or whatever, and he did this rap about like, oi, I was now listen up here and I'll tell you a tale. I was looking at a birdie on...
Wait, was it set to the beat of like... Do you think they saved the Benny Hill song for like the end of the show? Because that's what everybody's waiting for.
In fact, they did. I remember that. It ended.
It's the encore. They're like, he can't leave without playing the Benny Hill theme song.
I remember that special ended with some like stupid shtick where he was in Central Park and there was that, sped up silent movie type stuff where he's getting chased and they played the Benny Hill music for that. Yeah.
That's when the audience jumps to their feet and they're like, yes, yes.
It's been 25 years since I've seen this, by the way. I could be wrong.
And the letter writer has one little PS. Frank Henenlotter or William Lustig episodes coming soon. Your fan, Tony. I don't know if we'd have a full episode on those guys, but we've covered their work quite a bit on our Patreon stuff.
Yeah, Frank Henenlotter, I love him as a guy. I love him as a public figure. I love the work he does with Something Weird Video. The movies...
Oh, I really like Basket Case and Brain Damage. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm not a big Frankenhooker fan.
Bad Biology also, not so hot.
And that would apply the same stuff to William Lustig, even though I probably like a few more William Lustig movies. Because I really like Maniac Cop. I like Vigilante. I like all the DTV action films he kept being fired from in the 90s.
I think I probably like Lustig a bit better, too, because his stuff is a little more raw, a little grittier. Like the Frank Henenlotter ones are goofy.
Henenlotter would say it himself that they are approximations of his experiences at the Grindhouse.
That said, if Frank Henenlotter wants to be my friend, I would love that.
I once handed him a copy of Teddy Bomb while he was at a convention and said, I ripped off a lot of Brain Damage making this movie. I have not heard back from him since.
I'm sure it's on that big shelf of movies that he has behind him every time he's interviewed.
He's probably been sending letters, but they're to the wrong address. They've just been bouncing back. It's okay, Frank. We still love you. So what are we doing on the Patreon this week, Will?
We did something that we promised to do a while ago. For our Patreon subscribers, if we hit a certain financial goal for the month, we allowed them to put us through a marathon. We gave them several options for what marathon they can put us through.
And which one did they pick?
I'll tell you which ones they didn't pick. They didn't DreamWorks animated films, which it's a good thing they didn't. I couldn't have taken that much Shrek.
No, there would have been no Shrek. That was the category.
Oh,
all the DreamWorks.
Oh God, fuck.
So a Shark's Tale, B movie.
Oh, I'm so glad that one didn't win.
I think I would have laughed more through that one. Oh, that one's still going to make it on the list next time. Don't worry.
They also didn't pick John Cleese paycheck movies, which, I guess I'm not shocked that one didn't win.
I feel like you would have suffered more than the American Pie with the John Cleese ones.
When you look at John Cleese's filmography, it's pretty dire. But what they picked was 5 American Pie movies. So we watched American Pie, American Pie 2, American Wedding, and American Reunion. And we also delved into one of the direct-to-video spin-off films, American Pie Presents Band Camp.
And so this is one of our self-destructing episode. So I don't know when I will take it off, but probably in like a week or two. It will disappear from the Patreon feed forever. And it's like a full episode. I think it came out to like 40 minutes because we recorded a little 5-minute bit after every movie that we watch. And what's really funny while editing it is you will never get a more kind of whiplash Will than listening to this episode, because from watching the second one where Will's like, I'm having a fun time, this is fun, to the third one where he's like, I hate this is awful. I'm so miserable. And there were still 2 movies left after that one.
Yeah, it started strong, and then I quickly was driven mad.
Too much Stifler, or Stifler clones.
Yeah, in the direct-to-video one, you meet Stifler's brother, and let me tell you, you, sir, are no Stifler.
You start to feel nostalgic for Sean William Scott's endless dancing to no comedic effect. So you can check that out on our Patreon, patreon.com/TheImportantCinemaClub, $5 a month. You get that episode we just mentioned and our entire Patreon back catalog. You don't even need friends. You can just hang out with us, The Important Cinema Club.
Well, what are we doing next week, Justin?
We're going to explore The Blacklist. Yes, that's right. When Hollywood decided to bring some of its artists to court and ask them, can you name names of communist sympathizers that you know?
Yes, and we're going to talk about films either written by Blacklist people or inspired by the witch hunt in some way. We're going to talk about Leo McCarey's scorching anti-communist film, My Son John.
And we will also talk about Salt of the Earth, an independent production that was just made to be a pro-communist feature film done by a bunch of blacklisted people in Hollywood. It's a very big subject, so I feel like we're going to try to be like a little introduction to people that are curious and, using these films. I think we had another one on the list. I think we wanted a pro-Russia film before the blacklist happened, right?
Yeah, so we're already apologizing in advance, but that's okay.
That's how we do it. You gotta ready people's expectations before they get into it. So until next week, my name's Justin DeClue.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening. Justin here to thank some of our new Patreon subscribers, who include Lloyd Blackman, Ian McNamara, Amy Seeger, Ollie Drumbum, Peyton Cook, Archer Miles, Adam Herbner, Garrett Frazen, Ethan, Jack Anderson, Andrew Lewis, Alex Katz, Danny, Esme Holden, Carlos Ramirez, Nick Martin, and Felix Dembinski. Thank you very much for becoming patrons. We could not do it without you. And we now return you to your regular scheduled programming. Remember when Knives Out came out, and it was essentially a mid-budget movie, right? I think it cost $50 million to make. It made like $300+ million. Like, that's a victory for something that's not a blockbuster. Did you see the news recently, considering the Knives Out sequels?
Yeah, I saw that Netflix bought 2 Knives Out sequels for the sum of $450 million.
Money doesn't exist. Like, it doesn't mean anything, right? Like, what is $450 fucking million for 2 sequels? And that, like, the news that came out, that seems that, like, Netflix only bought the rights to them. Like, is that $450 million production cost? Because it didn't sound like it.
I don't know. I'm sure some of it has to go to the production cost, right? It's like, so Amazon bought Coming to America, the sequel, and they bought it for something like $120 million, I think, from Paramount. But
that was a complete film, though.
But that amount of money covers the production cost of the film and gives Paramount a little bit of profit. And I imagine that there's some kind of deal that's going on here. Like, maybe each of those movies will cost $100 million each. And then that gives the people making it $100 million profit as well. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess.
It's a lot of fucking money. Holy shit.
Like, that is so much money. It's kind of like nauseating. It's like, I just don't even want to know that. Like, just do it behind closed doors. But when they make announcements like that, it's like, you know what? Don't make mid-budget movies. Let's just have like Godzilla fight Superman or whatever. Doesn't matter. Movies are dead, right?
I mean, when The Irishman was in production and we heard that it cost $200 million, I mean, that seemed like a Heaven's Gate style situation.
Gotta be honest, that 200 mil, not really up on screen either. For the CG effects that you see them and you go like, well, it's still bad though.
It's all up there on Al Pacino's face, Justin.
Al Pacino making him from, I don't know how old he is, 80 to 60. That's $100 million right there.
But I mean, that seemed like the height of decadence, but I didn't realize at the time that, I mean, that would just be the new normal. Like, do you remember in the 90s when it was considered so insane that a company like Miramax paid $10 million for a movie at Sundance? $10 million!
And now these big sums of money are being thrown around, and it just means nothing. If anything, it is raising the bar that anybody making even a middle, production like Knives Out is expected to make hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, instead of it being a modest hit that becomes, kind of a very well-loved movie when it comes to homes and continues to live on. Nope. Now it needs to come out of the gate and make at least $300 million would be better to get any attention. Because, like I said, money doesn't really mean anything. So it's just numbers being thrown around and, executives having to, top those numbers for them to have any value to their own lives and the things that they participate in no ways creatively.
But also, like, money doesn't mean anything in the sense that these movies aren't actually making money directly. Like, Netflix is paying $450 million to have these movies on their service.
No one will ever know how much money it generates for Netflix.
Yeah, even Netflix won't really know because there's no way to know how many people created a Netflix account on that day just to see those movies, or how many people kept their Netflix subscription going for another month just to see those movies.
Well, you know why, right? It's because when they announced that they spent $450 million on Knives Out, that makes people that, are on the stock market want to buy Netflix stock because if they're spending that much money, that must mean they have a lot of money or think it will make a lot of money, which makes the stock go up, which makes the company have more value, even though technically it's like billions and billions and billions of dollars in the red.
Do you remember hearing earlier, a couple of months ago, that Sony was shopping around the new James Bond movie to various streaming?
Yeah, didn't they want almost like $700 million for it?
Yeah, because, I guess that's about how much they would have needed to get to make a profit on it, and nobody took it. And so we know that that's the limit right now. $600-700 million, they're not yet quite willing to pay that.
And wasn't there like something going around that the producers of James Bond were losing like $1 million or $2 million a day just based on interest from the movie not coming out?
Oh, painful. Wow.
Is it painful? Are they going to have to get rid of one of their 10 yachts or something like that?
Yeah, I don't give a shit. But that movie was supposed to come out of April last year. If what you're saying is true, they'll have lost $500 million by the time it comes out.
Yeah, probably. But listen, no movie ever goes into profit, so they never really have to pay anybody. And it doesn't matter, other than the news headlines that go around letting people know how much stuff sold, or things break box office records, like Avatar just did because it got re-released. What?
You know what? I'm not a numbers man.
No, I don't care either.
I'm just here to enjoy the cinema.
That's right. King Kong versus Godzilla on the small screen in your home. But actually, this was all a big build-up to listen. If money doesn't mean anything, someone should give me $100,000 to make a Knives Out ripoff. I'm right here. I'll do it. It'll cost you less money than having to go the Netflix route.
You're underselling yourself. I think a streaming service, maybe not Netflix, maybe like Crackle. Is Crackle still in existence?
Oh, no. Listen, let's think Canadian. So maybe like CBC Gem. That's one of the streaming services out there.
Yeah, they should give you $5 million. That seems like an enormous amount of money for Canada.
I got my cast. Catherine O'Hara, Daniel Levy, Colin Feore, Paul Gross, Simon Liu from Kim's Convenience. That show's canceled. The whole cast of Kim's Convenience. I feel like I'm going to have $1 million hit on my hands.
Well, I'm sure they're listening right now.